I just got done with a huge project on my Argo. I took all those chains off, all of the axles that go out to the tires off, all the way around it, and I've replaced or checked every single bearing in this thing to make sure that they're 100% on and ready for the next adventure. Before we put the 4 plates in it, let's take a quick look at how this thing works. So you can see here that that's the idler pulley there, comes directly off the engine. There's one double chain that goes to the front tires, and there's one double chain that comes back to there, and then there's single chains from there back. One of the cool things about this, gotta start at neutral. One of the cool things about this Argo is it has what they call an Admiral transmission. So it's a skid steer machine, which means that one side stops so the other side keeps going so it can turn. And this machine with the Admiral transmission, when it's in high gear, which it is right now, let's put it, there's the gear. When we go to turn, we'll notice that one side slows down but keeps going. Let's go. There's going forward, and now if I turn, notice how the one side is still turning. The other side just turns a lot faster. Put it into low gear, which I'm going to do here in a second. We'll stop it, put it in low gear. In low gear, what happens then is one side completely stops while the other side turns. Okay, we're back at the Argo. Again, we've taken the 4 corner tires off to kind of expose this whole wheel assembly. What we're going to do is we're going to take this apart. We'll look at it on the inside. So you can see that this axle here goes all the way through to there. The way that we'll take that off is there's a set screw right on the top of that sprocket, and on the end we'll take that bolt off. That goes into the end of the axle and holds the axle out. And then there's a bearing here in the back you can see. And so we'll take this bracket here off. There's 4 bolts there. We'll take those off there on the inside. While we're doing this, we're just going to inspect this sprocket, see if any teeth are busted or edges are busted off of them, which could happen. And that looks like it's pretty good. Alright, so we got this back sprocket. Trying to take this axle out. Here's the axle. Sprocket here. This sprocket is free. You got this bearing out here, and I think that this bearing is hung up. So no set screw. You can feel the threads there. No set screw there. You can feel the threads. I've taken the end cap off. We already looked at that. So I think what's happened is this bearing is stuck on the shaft. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray penetrating oil into both of those holes and on the end, and try to get some penetrating oil down next to this axle here. And we'll let this sit there for however long, it doesn't matter. And then kind of the question is that bearing in good shape or not? And so when we go out here to this rear axle, there's 2 bearings. There's a bearing inside here, and there's that bearing there. Boy, you know when you feel it. It's smooth, no play, no wiggle. That is probably fine, but I really want to take it off there anyway and see if I can clean them up, repack them in grease. That way I just know what I got. But boy, that feels pretty good. Alright, so what I'm going to try here is I have a socket here that I'm going to put on the end of the shaft so it goes over the screw so that the end of those threads get protected. I'm going to see if I can whack this socket, see if that does anything. Alright, so we're going to put this slide hammer on here. Okay, so this is a slide hammer. I'm going to run this way, and if we're lucky, we'll pull that out. Okay, so I'm going to take this end one off here. We already looked at that once on the other side. Wow, that was already kind of loose. That's a little scary. Okay, 2 washers, bolt. What we're going to do is, there's 4 bolts here, so we're going to go on the other side and we're going to take those loose. Washer and a nut, and I like to put everything back. Keep it together, otherwise you'll lose it. Well, now this is how it's supposed to work. Look at that. So, there the whole thing is. There's the bearing. And then this keeper here, it pinches the bearing in between. Okay. That comes apart there. And there's the bearing. It'd be really nice if he just popped out of there, but we'll work on that. And there's that bearing. Okay, so we're going to put that in kerosene. We'll look at that in just a minute. So this is loose here. It does. It's got 1 set screw in it there. All right, so you can see we've got a set screw there. I got an Allen wrench on it. What's interesting? Okay, so that's free now. Okay, so this is that outside axle. We're going to take these 4 bolts off. This piece will come off. There's a bearing behind there. We're going to take that off real quickly. Got that sprocket in there that's sliding off the shaft. There we go. So that's this whole thing. That's the shaft and the bearing housing. And now we're going to see if we can get that bearing out of there. And that is a gasket. It keeps water from getting inside the tub. It'd be nice if we could get that off there without ruining it. And it looks like the gods are looking down upon us. Okay, there we go. Look at that. Gasket off, nice and slick. There's that bearing keeper. That'll be important later on, obviously. And there's the bearing itself. And right there, it's got 1 set screw. It's got 2 set screws. So we're going to get our Allen wrench and take those set screws out and see if we can get lucky. Okay, so something that we want to look at before we get too crazy is putting this thing back together. That's going to go on there, and that's going to go on there. So we're going to have the outside, this keeper. That's the bearing there. You got this bearing protector there and the gasket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to clean all this up in a parts washer and then put some penetrating oil on that. First thing we're going to do is we're just going to get kerosene on everything, so kind of start sort of magic. So there's 3 parts. I'm going to put, there's a trough over here. I'm going to put 3 parts in that trough and let that stuff soak. So I've put this axle upside down in a bucket, and I'm just gonna, where that shaft meets the bearing, I'm just spraying that with penetrating oil. And this is stuff I'm using. I'm not saying it's better than anything else, but it's what I happen to have here. And you can see it's all foaming up on there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let that soak for a while. I'm going to turn it upside down the other way, and I'm going to spray the other side. I got my axle here. I got the bearing. Remember, that bearing is stuck on there. So I have a hydraulic press here. Go look at it. There, it's got a ram that'll come down. I'm going to put that shaft on there with the bearing below it, and I'm going to press it out. Let's see how that goes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this grease zerk out of here. I've loosened up with a wrench already. We'll set him right there. And that way, this whole thing is flat. And I'm going to put this, see if this works out. It's sticking down through there, and I'm going to press that shaft out of there. See that it's pushing that axle down through the bearing right there. That's going to go relatively easy now. Well, whatever easy is, but let's give that a shot and see. There it is. Nice. Alright, so we're going to put this into kerosene and then get cleaned up and see what it looks like. I'm going to put Everseas on the inside of this bearing. I did have these freeze up on the last time where they froze on the shaft, so we don't want that to happen. And these are all lock nuts, so that's a good thing. I'm going to put that just like that. Washer on the back side of that. And that. The first one I'm just going to get so he's starting to snug up. I'm going to get them all so they're starting to snug up, then I'll go back and tighten them off. Okay, so I got that in there. I got Everseas. Okay, so we're back on the outside of the machine here. We're going to put this in there. This piece here already needs to be on there. And I need a gasket to go around here. These gaskets kind of, sort of, help retain these bolts back. This bearing is going to go on this shaft. I'm going to take some Scotch-Brite to this shaft and get this cleaned up. You can see there's a flat spot here for the set screw. And I'm going to put almost all of these on the four corners had seized up. But these ones on the inside, 4, weren't seized up nearly as bad. So, but I'm going to put Everseas on them anyway. Here, first thing I'm going to do is put the bearing cover on. We'll take a look at how that works in a minute. I'm going to put this bearing on. And this bearing, see there's a flat spot here that goes for a set screw. I've already put some Loctite on these set screws. And this first set screw I put in the middle of that flat spot. And tighten that up on there. And you can see the collar goes to the inside of it. That's going to be important in a little bit. Okay, so now there's 2 sprockets that are going to go in on the inside of this. The big one's going to be the first one. I'm going to take them both though. I'm going to set them inside the machine here. Alright, so there's a hole right here, and that is where that set screw ends up going. And so, slide that back out. And this collar goes on the inside this way. Now, before we get too crazy, in here there is a grease port on this bearing. So I want to find that grease port. And it's right there. I'm going to make it right dead top center for that grease port there. And then when this goes on there, you can see there's a zerk here, and it lines up with that grease port. Alright, we're going to move and look at the inside of the machine here. Alright, so you can see now, can't see it, but we'll look at it in a second. I have the two sprockets in here. We put this bearing in here. I've rammed that shaft through the bearing. And if you remember, when I put the outside bearing on, I said I'm going to put the set screws in the middle of this flat spot. And so I tightened them up on there. Now what I'm going to do is put washer here, bolt on there, tighten it up, and it's going to pull this whole shaft the rest of the way that it needs to come this way. So let's take a look at that process. And usually you can only start with one washer on here, unless I was really good, then maybe I can start with two. So I'm putting some Loctite on that bolt, so I don't want it to come off. I'm going to see if I can start with two on here. And it feels like I'm going to be able to do that. That's sweet. You can see that the two sprockets are there. You can tell that's the way they go because there's the chain tightener going forward. And if we go to the outside here, you can see that I put a bar in there just to keep that whole sprocket from turning. Alright, so let's see. Alright, so that feels a little rough, but there's no grease in that yet. So the way that these greased here. So what I'm doing is I'm greasing it. I'm going to work that grease in that bearing a little bit. And then there's the bearing on the inside that I'm going to have to go back and grease. We'll grease that one. So the way we check this is we check it up and down, in and out, and it is tight, tight, tight. When I spin it, there's no gravelly sound. That is smooth. And so that is completed. Nice! So that's how you put an axle back into an Argo. And that you'd use the exact same process on any of the four wheels on each side. This one just, the four corners just have this extra hub here. We'll end up taking a look at one of the inside ones, but they just missed this hub and they have this piece here. And so this bolts directly to it. Okay, this is the back axle, and this sprocket's going to go on the outside. There's two set screw holes. You can see there's one set screw hole there and one here. And this is going to go on the outside one. And so I'm going to put some Loctite on this set screw because I don't want it coming out. Alright, so that's set. Alright, we're getting ready to put the rest of the chains on my Argo. And ideally what's going to happen is we're going to make it so that that top hole right there is lined up on all of these. You can see the first two, they're top dead center. And what that allows you to do is grease it when the wheels are on. So you'll be able to put the grease gun through here to that zerk, and each of those has a zerk on the top. I've already put the front two chains on, and I've saved you the pain of having to watch that. They are the worst to do. So what's different on these front ones is that they're double roller chains. And these double chains, you can see here is the connector link, and so this connector link goes all the way through here, and in the middle it has two spacers. So it's got a link that goes all the way through, two spacers in the middle, spacer here, and then the retaining link here, and that connects into the chain there, and we'll look at one of those. The next two sets of chains are single roller chains, so they go on a single sprocket, and they are more accessible. So what you can see is I've used a pair of vice grips, and I'll show you these vice grips in a minute because I've done a modification to them. And I've clamped these links together, and I'm going to push this chain link in between them. What I'm doing is I'm adjusting this just a little bit, just so it gets it just tight enough to push that through there. Alright, now I can take the vice grips off, and the thing about these vice grips, I've ground a couple channels into them so that they hook onto the links. Okay, so that's done. I'll put this keeper link on it then, and then put the retaining link on here. And the retaining link, you want the dead end going forward, and so you start with this, the flexible end here. Put that on first, on the forward side. There. You can push that so that it is free. Okay. Okay, so now you can see that that keeper link is on there. And so, we're going to go ahead and finish these other three chains. One of the cool things is you can see that that is top dead center, just like that one, and just like the very front one. Alright, so I've got all my chains installed. You can see this first one here is an idler pulley. It comes directly out of the transmission. There's a double chain that goes forward to the front tires, or front axles. There's a double chain that comes back, and daisy chains here to a single chain. That single chain then comes there to another sprocket that's daisy chains off to the last one. And so I have all of the chains back on. Now I'm going to put the last two tires on. You can see here, each of these tires, I run tracks on this machine, and to put the tracks on it I have a bit of a spacer. There's a 1/2 inch spacer that goes on here. That's been drilled. That's been drilled to the hole here, so you can actually look through and grease it there. So again, you can still grease everything. And you can see my caulk job there. So we're going to go ahead and put those on, give it a test drive today.